right, good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, everyone. Okay, hi. All right, so my name is Roxanne Brizan Martin, for those of you who do not know me, and I'll be the chair for this afternoon's forum. So you'll be seeing me in and out. I am also supposed to bring remarks on behalf of the Department of Economics, so I'll incorporate it into one thing, and then we'll move on, right? So on behalf of the Department of Economics, I would like to thank you and welcome you to our second installment of the Youth Economic Forum under the theme Health and Well-Being, Quality Education, and Climate Action, which targets Sustainable Development Goals 3, 4, and 13. The Youth Economic Forum was established earlier this year through a collaborative effort between the Department of Economics, the HEU Center for Health Economics, and the Economic Society of the University of the West Indies as an avenue for engaging and empowering youth. To utilize young people's potential as agents of change requires involving and empowering them in development, policies, and supporting their participation at all levels. According to the UNDP, young people who represent a majority of the population in most developing countries are today visibly contributing as political actors, innovators, entrepreneurs, and peace builders. It is hoped that today's forum presents an opportunity for engagement on pertinent issues in which the voice of the youth, that's all of us, yes, can be heard. All of us can be heard. So I would like to thank you for taking the time to come out today, and I hope that you all will enjoy the forum and feel free to participate, right? At this point, I would like to invite Mrs. Halima Ali Sisbain, who would bring remarks on behalf of the HEU Center for Health Economics.
Okay, all protocols observe. A pleasant good afternoon to all. I'd like to start by commending you, the students, for attending today. Usually it's done at the end, but I would like to start by commending you for attending this forum and being most present and on time. It definitely mirrors your commitment and your dedication to involve and weigh in on discussions involving issues surrounding you and the Caribbean region. It demonstrates a wave of change that the young people, like us, will be instrumental in moving through the region. And for that, I would like you to give yourselves a round of applause. The HU Center for Health Economics is, under the astute guidance of Professor Carl Theodore, is focused on health and health-related research. And more recently, we've embarked on research in the social sector research as well. Our intention at HU is to engage in impactful research. And if we're talking impactful research, youth must be part of that equation. Do you all agree? Yes? Okay. That's the reason for us being a collaborator on this forum. HU and the team at HU believes in embracing opportunities that involve young people and ensuring that young people has a voice. I want to urge you as students, and I reflect upon my time and possibly Roxanne as well, where you have opportunities like these to come, be present, and participate. These are opportunities, and if you have a look around the world, not a lot of students and not a lot of young people are afforded these opportunities. There are a lot of depressed environments where students, young people are not allowed, not given the opportunity to voice their opinion. So I want to urge you to embrace that, feel part of it, and be motivated to be part of initiatives like these. And before I close, I want to challenge you. You know, there is this thing about challenge going around recently. I want to challenge you to share your experience with 2 of your peers after you leave here today. All right? And the intention of that is to ensure for the next forum, we have a bigger audience, more voices, more students, and more inclusion. How many of you can take up that challenge? Yes? Okay, very well. And all the best for today's forum, and look forward to seeing you next semester when we again engage our students. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mrs. Alice Spann. We would now call Mr. Kieran Rubin. He is the president of the Economic Society of the University of the West Indies, and he's also an economics major with the Department of Economics.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of the Economic Society of the University of the West Indies, we'd like to thank each and every one of you all for coming out today and participating with us. On a side note, we'd like to thank our collaborators, which are the Department of Economics and the Center for Health Economics, the HEU. Also, we'd like to thank our sponsor, Sagicor, for sponsoring us today. On our next note, our team, which is centered around health, well-being, education, and climate action. I mean, some students might see this team and say, well, it's not an interesting team, or it's not really, eye-catching. But if you can look around and every day in the news, you hear something based on these topics, and it really encourages you to open up your minds and learn more about climate change, the environment, quality education, well-being, etc. And, I always urge students, every semester to not just come in the forum and just sit down because their lecturers tell them they have to come, or, to just learn something from the forum and see if they can challenge themselves to speak on behalf of that team or topic in the future or with someone else, not just in economics, but in law, in engineering, in finance, and just open up their stock of human capital and also their mindset towards the team. On ending note, we'd like to thank you all again, and we would like you all to enjoy the refreshments that we have provided. And please have a blessed and enjoyable day today. Thanks.
Just to note, the refreshments is for after, right? So without further ado, we would like to go straight into our forum. And before we do that, I'd like to introduce our moderator, Mr. Jason Alexander. Mr. Jason Alexander has an MSc and is as a trained environmental economist with over 15 years work experience as an educator and educational administrator at tertiary level institutions in Trinidad and Tobago. Over the past 15 years, he has acquired and honed skills in researching, lecturing, editing, and reviewing. Mr. Alexander currently serves as a senior researcher under the Academic Affairs Division of Cipriani College of Labor and Cooperative Studies, a position he has held for the past decade. More recently, in August 2019, he was appointed to serve as a member of the Standing National Labor Market Council of Trinidad and Tobago. This cabinet-approved multi-stakeholder committee provides advice to the Minister of Labor and Small Enterprise Development on matters related to labor market information. Mr. Alexander has also served as an independent researcher and consultant with the following organizations: Sir Arthur Lewis Institute of Social and Economic Studies, Caribbean Policy Development Center in Barbados, the Sustainable Economic Development Unit, the University of the West Indies Distant Education Center, now called the UWI Open Campus, Trinidad and Tobago Electricity Commission, TNTEC, and the Australian Institute of Business. We welcome Mr. Alexander. And he was one of my lecturers.
Good afternoon, everyone. I would like to welcome all to this Youth Economic Forum. I'd also like to acknowledge some of my former lecturers, Dr. Lafourcade, currently head Department Economics, Mr. Roger McLean, both lecturer, and I also worked with him as a research assistant in the past. I'd like to acknowledge Dr. Conrad as well, Dr. Yearwood, and I'm seeing another colleague from health economics, who I can't remember right now, but I remember the face. So it's good to see some familiar faces here, and glad to see the students making yourselves available and taking time to both participate in the form of the panelists as well as the other students who are here to actively raise thought-provoking questions. What I would like to do now is to invite our panelists to take their positions in front. And then, so you'll see. And then we'll begin very shortly. So the format for the discussion this afternoon would be, as we see in front besides me, we have 4 panelists. So each panelist would be introduced, and then they would be given 10 minutes to speak on the issues related to the conference. I'd specify which one is speaking to the particular issue. Secondly, subsequently, after that 40-minute presentation from each of them, I would interact with the panelists and probably raise 1 or 2 questions with them, so we hear their feedback based on their presentation. That would be for about 10 minutes, and then we would open the floor to you, members of the audience, to ask each of the panelists whatever questions you may ask, and they would respond accordingly. Then we would conclude by allowing each panelist, member of the panel, to indicate any closing remarks they may have had based on your feedback or input, based on the input or feedback that may have come from myself as facilitator. And then we would hand over to the chair and the session would conclude. We want to encourage all to participate freely. It's a youth economic forum. Granted, we have panelists. You can still some further engagement based on any burning issues that you may have. So without any further ado, I would like to introduce the first panelist, Ms. Dana Sukdeo, who is on my immediate left. And let me give you a bit of information about Dana. Ms. Dana Sukdeo was born and raised in Southeast Trinidad and discovered her passion for the field of economics while attending St. Joseph's Convent, San Fernando. Currently a third-year student at the University of the West Indies, Dana is pursuing her bachelor's degree in economics. She is also a public relations officer of the Economic Society of the University of the West Indies. After graduating, she plans to pursue her master's degree in economics. She is particularly interested in becoming a lecturer and hopes to make an impact with her economic contributions. Outside of academics, she is dedicated to strength training and has hopes of also working in the fitness industry. Dana spends her free time working with orphanages as she believes that success is not engraved in certificates, but is the impact which you have on others that is more important. So let's give Dana our undivided attention as she presents to us for the next 10 minutes on a matter related to climate action. Could we give a warm welcome?
So before I begin, I would like to start with some facts. Fact number 1. Climate change is an ongoing phenomenon that has been around since the 1900s. With rising sea levels and rising global temperatures, the Caribbean region remains highly vulnerable to these effects. And the only reason that we seem to be taking action against it now is because we finally see these devastating things taking place in front of us. So we see things like storms wiping out banana plantations in St. Lucia, sugarcane production in Cuba, and we also see our tourism industry being affected. Fact number 2. Scientists have predicted that for decades to come, global temperatures are going to continue to rise. And if temperatures continue to rise by 2 degrees Celsius, global GDP is going to drop by 15%. If temperatures increase by 4 degrees Celsius, global GDP is opted to drop at an alarming 30%, which is worse than how it dropped during the Great Depression. The only difference is now we won't be able to reverse the impacts of it. Fact number 3. Trinidad and Tobago has allocated the most amount of money towards education in our budget over the past few years. So we've climbed that educational ladder. We've achieved higher literacy rates. We're now third highest in the Caribbean. And we've also pushed out an enormous amount of graduates. Fact number 4, and my final fact. Trinidad and Tobago was named the top polluter per capita in the entire world, pushing out 3.6 kilograms of plastic wastage per day. So how are these things related? My question today is our education system actually improving the quality of our lives? Is it improving the quality of our environment? Is it helping us to think and act in a sustainable manner? And my answer to that is, as my data shows me, a harsh no. Climate action is listed as goal number 13 in the Sustainable Development Goals. And within this target, the UNDP wants to achieve improved education towards climate action. Now, Trinidad and Tobago's education system is inherited from the British colonial rule, right? And what we see is that it's very exam-oriented. It's a textbook-style learning system that fosters regurgitation, and you would see it stifling creativity and innovative thinking from time to time. So we train students to prepare for this exam that determines the course of their entire lives within a curriculum that is used to compare their academic performance nationwide. And while it's a good tool in doing that, what are we really comparing? How well one student can memorize in comparison to the other? And as Albert Einstein once said, you cannot judge a fish on its ability to climb a tree. How many of us in this room here today think that you can confidently go out into the world and, with a hands-on approach, tackle problems like climate action, get our poverty rates down, get our crime rates down? How many of us think that we are well equipped with the education system to go and tackle these life-threatening problems? So we have an increased amount of doctors, lawyers, accountants, economists, but yet we remain to be the world's #1 polluter. Why? We are being taught the most complex algebraic equations in the classroom, but I don't think that we are being taught the simple act that is sustainability. Do we think that as an educated society that this is the right direction that we're going in? So when we throw our plastic cups on the road, when we go to the beach and we leave our plastic cups on the beach, do we think, how is this affecting me? Do we take into consideration that by 2048, almost all of the fish in the sea are going to go extinct? Do we take into consideration that 50 to 85% of our oxygen actually comes from phytoplanktons in the ocean? So that when we contribute to climate change and we contribute to rising sea levels and we pollute the oceans, that we're not only harming sea life, but we're also harming our lives and our future generation lives. People tend to think that, since they threw their plastic bottles in a green garbage container that says recycle, that it acts as compensation for all the other ways that they contribute to climate change. So they tend to think, well, hey, I use energy efficient light bulbs, or I use paper straws, so it doesn't really matter if I leave my phone charger plugged in while I'm not using it. It's no big deal. It is a big deal. And this is called the rebound effect. Do we think also that as an educated people, our contributions to climate change affects the poor? Because unlike us, the higher income earners, they don't have that financial safety net. So when it rains for 5 minutes and the place flood out, and their entire house is damaged from flood, they find it very difficult to come back from this. And this is why I think also that social consciousness and equity should be promoted within our education system. In my opinion, we don't take these things into consideration because sustainability is not embedded in us. It's not part of our culture. It's not part of our education system. There's a discount factor in the sense that Trinidad and Tobago, we often don't take into consideration the impacts that our actions have on us in the moment. So, for example, we're often desensitized when it comes to things like natural disasters. We fail to plan for things like hurricanes, earthquakes, and things like this because we'd rather deal with it later than now. And this in itself goes against sustainable development. If we were to look at countries around the world, we would see that in Japan, for example, their education system has environmental consciousness at the core of it. It's the foundation upon which everything is built. Before a certain age, they don't even teach their students subjects. They instill in them morals and values, and these things help foster a more climate-friendly environment. Costa Rica is another example. And since the 1980s, in fact, Costa Rica has been one of the world's leading countries in promoting environmental education. Mexico is another example, also Italy. These countries are also in the process of implementing laws that make environmental consciousness mandatory in their school curriculum. So yeah, in terms of Trinidad, we know we increased the amount of graduates and we increased the attainment of education. But within doing so, did we really increase the quality of it? So we pushed out more graduates in hopes that they would earn higher income and they would increase their consumption and increase their quality of life. And in the short term, it did. Because they could now afford to buy things that they couldn't buy before. So they could now afford to buy a car. But what the system failed to do was to educate them on the social and environmental costs that comes with owning that car. So years from now, if we can't enjoy our environment, if we can't take a walk, if we can't go to the beach, did our education system really improve the quality of our life? The system has failed to promote sustainability thus far, in my opinion, and it needs to foster an out-of-textbook thinking, because the answer to climate change and these new issues that are arising isn't found in a textbook. So because of this, we find that we have a highly academic population acting in a way that harms them, acting in a way that harms the environment and their future generations to come. Little thought is put into the things like the amount of air pollution they contribute to when they own a car. At the primary school level, we see teachers talking to children about, reduce, reuse, recycle. They administer 1 or 2 projects on it. But this is not enough, because these things go into a student's short-term memory, and then it comes out like right after they leave the classroom. And I'm not saying it doesn't stick with some, but the ones that it does stick with, to what extent does it do? At the secondary school level, we have a few subjects that incorporates environmental consciousness, but these subjects aren't compulsory. And this is the problem. This is the bridge that we need to gap. We need to include environmental consciousness as a mandatory part of our education curriculum. And I think that these sustainability practices needs to be implemented at the earliest stage possible, which is the early childhood education stage, because by the age of 5, a student has already developed their ideas of morals and values. So by doing this, we not only push forward an entire new generation rooted in sustainability, but we also find a way to help mitigate the climate change problem. And this is the direction I think we need to push the education system in, because we can allocate all the money in the world towards education, and we can increase the quality of our lives in terms of increasing consumption. But is it really worth it if years from now we can't take a deep breath because the air is so polluted, because we can't swim in the oceans because it's so toxic? Did the education system, really improve the quality of our lives? Thank you.
Wow, very good presentation. Yeah, we want to thank Ms. Sukdeo for her presentation, some thought-provoking facts as well as issues relating the climate action, this particular goal, number 13. We now want to introduce our second panelist, who is Ms. Alicia Nanku. And I'll just give you a little background of Alicia. Alicia Nanku also hails from Central Trinidad and is an economics major student at the University of the West Indies. She's 21 years old and is currently the secretary of the Economics Society of the University of the West Indies. In her free time, she's involved in hiking and non-profit charitable organizations such as the Gordon Youth Charitable Foundation. She aspires to be an economist and hopes that in doing so, she can contribute towards national development. More recently, she represented the Department of Economics in the annual Conference on the Economy debating competition. So I would now like to introduce Alicia Nanku as she presents on the issue of health and well-being. Let's give her our undivided attention.
Economic growth without investment in human development is unsustainable and unethical. This is a quote by Amartya Sen in 2000, where he places people at the center of development. Today I will be presenting on Sustainable Development Goal 3, which speaks to good health and well-being. Now, when we speak about health, what exactly are we speaking about? What exactly comes to mind? What comes to mind for me is mortality rates, substance abuse, which speaks to drug and alcohol abuse, and sexual and reproductive health care services. Now, according to the World Health Organization, under Sustainable Development Goal 3, there are some subsections of goals that they hope to achieve by the year 2030. Now, these include, but are not limited to, reduction of the maternal mortality rate, ending preventable deaths of newborns, ending the epidemic of AIDS by 2030, and supporting the research and development of medicines and vaccines for communicable and non-communicable diseases, which primarily would affect developing countries. And when we say developing countries, we are speaking about the Caribbean. Out of many, we are speaking about the Caribbean because the Caribbean makes up a significant portion of the developing world. So firstly, for my first point, I would like to categorically state that an investment in health is an investment in human capital. Now, health is critical for the formation of human capital. And I say this because unless a population is healthy and strong enough to work and earn, what are we really gaining? This society will remain underdeveloped. And in saying this, I would like to state that only a strong and healthy, skilled labor set is able to push the economy forward. Thus, health should be the core of any development strategy across the board. Now, first of all, I would like to look at non-communicable diseases. Now, when we say non-communicable diseases, I'm referring to things such as cancer, diabetes, obesity, heart disease. And non-communicable diseases are significant causes of morbidity and mortality across the world. And notice I did not say developing countries. I did not say just the Caribbean. I said across the world. And I think this is severely undermined, and we actually downplay the severity of non-communicable diseases because we're thinking, well, that wouldn't happen to me. What is the chances? What is the likelihood that I'm going to fall victim to one of these diseases? Well, I will now like to present you with some statistics to show that the severity of these diseases are prevalent in our country, and the likelihood that it could happen to one of us is not far-fetched. The World Health Organization has projected that over 70% of deaths worldwide is attributable to non-communicable diseases. And 80% of these deaths occur in developing countries, meaning the Caribbean as such. Now, let's bring it home a little bit. In Trinidad and Tobago, over 60% of all deaths are attributable to non-communicable diseases, of which heart disease is the major cause of death within our country. Now, the interesting part is that we actually have control over this. Believe it or not, we have control over this. This is not something that, well, yeah, I'll fall victim to it and that's that. No, we have control over this because we can change our lifestyle, we can change our consumption habits, we can change our levels of physical activity in order to change our outlook for the future, because little by little, and we may not realize it, we are depleting our own human capital. And yes, we in ourselves are our own human capital. And actually, that's what sustainable development is all about. That is what the essence of sustainable development speaks to, because sustainable development is preparing today for the future. It is preparing our resources, reserving and preserving our resources today for tomorrow. And I don't want to see anybody that I know fall a victim to non-communicable diseases or become just another statistic. So I think as youth especially, we should be a little more conscious about what we consume on a daily basis. And I understand the concept of convenience in terms of consumption. Because being a student, it's hard. It's hard to get up and prepare meals and watch what we're consuming. It's easier to just go out there, buy something, and call that. But at the end of the day, we have to think about the future. We have to think about our human capital base, because you and I form the future capital base of our country. It's not our mothers, it's not our fathers, it's us. So therefore, we need to put a little more consciousness into what we are consuming, our levels of physical activity, and what can be done to preserve ourselves for the future and to not just become another statistic. Now, earlier I mentioned that one of the goals under Sustainable Development Goal 3 is to end the epidemic of AIDS by 2030. Now, I want to speak about HIV/AIDS. Now, this is a sexually transmitted disease that has been rampant in the Caribbean for as long as we know it. And did you know that the Caribbean is the second most affected region in the world for HIV/AIDS prevalence rates? And I want to take it back in time a little bit to show you all where it actually originated from, because the epidemic of AIDS, it actually began in the early 1980s, and it stemmed from Jamaica in 1982 in the Caribbean. And it actually caught on and it spread like wildfire because 8 successive cases then popped up in Trinidad and Tobago. And over the last couple decades, we have actually seen a drop in the reported cases of HIV/AIDS within the Caribbean. But that does not mean by any means that persons have stopped engaging in risky sexual behavior, because notice that I said reported cases. Reported cases meaning that certain persons are probably living with the disease and don't even know about it. Certain persons are living with the disease and not coming forward for treatment. Certain persons are not even getting tested. So at the end of the day, the number that we anticipated to be could very well be higher than we expect or measure. Now, I want to point out an interesting fact, the fact that the recent migration flows into Trinidad and Tobago, the fact that in a couple of years we will be seeing the impacts of such migration flows on HIV and AIDS and the transmission of these diseases. Will it decrease? Will it increase? We don't know. So at the end of the day, the underlying statement would be that no matter what population, no matter what race, at the end of the day, if we are engaging in risky sexual behavior, then the outcome for HIV and AIDS transmission may not be one that we desire in the region. And I think that we need to pay a little more attention to that, because at the end of the day, our health is our wealth. Now, I want to point out that one of our broad topics for our panel discussion today is climate change. Now, one might ask themselves, what does climate change have to do with health? And climate change is very important in terms of health, because one of the major reasons why our countries are still considered as developing is because of our vulnerability to climate change. And the health of the human population is very sensitive to changes in the climate, changes in weather patterns, changes in precipitation levels. And one of these subsections under climate change is increases in temperatures. So increases in temperatures would increase our likelihood for deaths and illnesses related to heat within the region. And in addition to this, we have seen over the couple months past that there have been increases in rainfall, increases in precipitation levels. And this affects our country greatly. This affects our population greatly. This affects our human capital greatly, because we see there's an increase in waterborne illnesses, there's an increase in disease vectors, there is vulnerability to our local food production, and this all is an inherent challenge to Sustainable Development Goal number 3. Furthermore, there has been recorded an increase in occurrences of tropical cyclone events in the Caribbean when we compare it to, let's say 50 years ago. We take an example from Hurricane Dorian in Bahamas a couple months back, and we see the health of the population being compromised because there was a tremendous amount of deaths, there was a tremendous amount of losses of life. I think there was a report on BBC where they stated that there were actually dead bodies floating around in the floodwaters, and if this is not an impact of climate change on our population, on our region, then I don't know what is. Because of our geographic location, the Caribbean is actually expected to face the full brunt of climate change. Now, in closing, I would like to state that the aspect of health is a multidimensional one, And so it requires a multidimensional approach by policymakers. Therefore, we need to place health and the focus on human capital at the center of any development strategy that policymakers may come into contact to. And according to Amartya Sen, where he placed people at the center of development, placed human capital at the center of development, we look at countries such as Singapore, where they place people at their center of investment. And I think at the end of the day, health is one of the most important and significant factors in driving an economy forward. And we must always remember that without health, there can be no wealth. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alicia. If I go on to the other two panelists, just summarize briefly some comments that went so far. Dina reminded us of the importance of the target under the climate action goal, which speaks to infusing in our curriculums, increasing awareness to individuals about matters related to climate change, which would include adaptation strategies and mitigation strategies. She also touched a bit on the role of culture, our upbringing, our lifestyle, the Caribbean's ethos. We'll come back to these issues later on. Alicia, who came secondly, she addressed issues related to health and well-being, the phenomenon of the non-communicable diseases and how they impact our society and lifestyles. And I also liked how to the end, she also bridged or made a link between climate change and health. So, for example, she mentioned flooding and some of the diseases. Climate change also has an impact on health as it relates to mosquitoes breeding intensified, which would result in the spread of mosquito-borne diseases. So some rich discussion so far. We now turn over to the third panelist. I thought we'd just pause in between the four instead of going all the way straight through. All right? So allow me to introduce the third panelist, Ms. Corinne Gregoire. Ms. Gregoire is an MPhil PhD student with the Department of Economics at the St. Augustine campus. Her areas of research include poverty and inequality, focusing on labor markets, entrepreneurship, and the fiscal system. She currently serves as a lecturer at the Cipriani College of Labor and Cooperative Studies and has been there since 2009. Ms. Gregoire holds an Associate of Arts degree in Labor Studies from the Cipriani College of Labor and Cooperative Studies, a Bachelor of Science degree with honors in Management Studies and Economics, and an MSc in Economics from the University of the West Indies. Today, she'll be speaking to us about inequality and access to education. Let's give her our undivided attention as well.
Good afternoon, everyone. All protocols observed. My area of research is really inequality and the inequality and evolution of inequality and poverty within plural societies. So in looking at the inequality and the evolution of inequality in plural societies, because you're looking at that in relation to income distribution, you have to see where the inequality within society lies. So that meant that I had to step out of economics for a little bit and go across to sociology, because inequality within income distribution is going to start off with a sociological perspective. It's going to have a historical pointed, it's going to be cultural, and it's also going to be economic. Now that would have focused on the goal 10, which is to reduce inequality, but when you look at where inequality lies, you have to trace an individual's life path, and then that would have brought me back to goal 4, which is now to show education and equality of education. So when you're looking at a country, and you're looking at a developing country versus a developed country, in a developed country, there's normally higher levels of education and higher levels of literacy. But in a developing country, that is necessarily the case. And when you add a plural society, which is a developing economy, then the problems are more compounded. because there's going to be competition for the access for resources, right? But you have to ask yourself, what does education do? Education helps the individual realize their potential. It gives them opportunities. It can even be extended towards the entire economy, because education is going to give the labor force the tools to be able to innovate and to create cutting-edge goods and services within a global economy. So you want to see what education is going to do for the individual and for society. Now, if we take a step back and look at what education does in a developing country, and more so if we even go further back to see what a developed country does with education, we have to see what level of education is achieved by different countries. So I went back and I took a look at South Korea and Singapore. So I went to the World Population Review 2019, and I saw that those two countries had really high levels of collegiate education. So they are high in tertiary education. Most of their people would have at least registered for a program or have gone through at least 2 to 4 years of higher level education. And then I went on to the Bloomberg 2019 Innovation Report and Index, and then I found South Korea and Singapore once again. They are both topping the list. Now, Singapore continuously revamps its education system because they want to be able to dominate the economic environment and the global economy. So with that now, I said, well, possibly I should bring it back now to my local economy and to the Caribbean and to Trinidad and Tobago to see where we lie in terms of who we educate and what does our education system look like. Now, your income pattern and your income distribution, the amount of income you have access to, is going to tell you where you're going to put your child or your young when they start the education system. So it's going to, how much money you have determines if you're going to put your child into a prep school, or if you're going to put your child into a private school, or you're going to go to a religious body like a religious associated school. So from there, you put your child into a prep school, and then from the prep school, there may be a primary school that's related to the prep school. Now, when we get into the primary schools, there we meet up another problem, because we have some schools that are under academic watch. So I think I need to give you a little background of what a school being under academic watch is about. Now, the Ministry of Education, the Division of Educational Research and Evaluation, they do a national test every year, and the report for 2016, which would have given you 2011 to 2016, would have been published for us to view. Within that report, they're giving the students a national test, that's students from Standard 1 to Standard 3, based on maths and English, and they're giving you performance indicators and cutoff points. Now, the performance indicators would be if you exceed the standard from the test, and that's going to be giving you a superior economic performance. If you meet the standard, so you have a satisfactory performance. If you barely meet the standard, and then if you fell below the standard. Now, if you fell below the standard, you'd have to do significant work to get back up to the third cutoff point, which is barely meeting the standard. Now, these different standards would then be given weights, and from the weights, you're able to compile an academic performance index. And that academic performance index would be given based on the school and based on the performance of all the students. Students who would not have taken the national test would have been given a score of 0. Now, once these scores are compiled, the maximum score a school could get would be 560 points. Now, to break down what the academic performance index, or to explain academic watch, if the school gets a score between 401 to 560, they would be considered as excelling. If they get between 241 to 400, they'd be seen as mostly effective. And if they get between 81 to 240, they'll be seen under academic watch, and under 80 points would be academic emergency. So we now want to put those numbers into perspective for what our situation, our education system looks like. So we look at school districts by status. So if we could break down our country by the districts by Caroni, Port of Spain, St. George's East, St. George's West, Victoria, Tobago, we have 20 schools in Port of Spain that are under academic watch, 18 in St. George's East, and 10 in Southeast. The schools that are excelling would be 15 in Caroni and 19 in Victoria. Now, we can take a different look at how we see students at the schools that are under academic watch. Probably it may be a management problem and not just a student problem. So we're looking at who manages which type of schools. So if you are a government school, we have 22 that are under academic watch. Catholic-run schools, there are 28 under academic watch. Anglican schools, there are 10 under academic watch. The schools that are excelling, there are 13 Hindu schools that are excelling, 13 Presbyterian schools that are excelling, and 23 private schools that are excelling. So again, your income distribution is going to affect you inside there. If you have a private school, you're going to be able to send your child to the best school. Now, that is going to take care of the primary school situation. So if you're coming from a school under academic watch, then you have to write SEA exam or C, and then that will now take you into secondary school. Now, the selection process, say if you have 300 points to get from SEA, the person who gets the highest mark, they will top the exam, and then they will go across into the school of their choice, because you're given 4 choices, and you could go to your first choice, your second choice, your third choice, etc. Now, if you're coming from a school that's under academic watch, the likelihood is that you could miss the marker, and you could be zoned, not getting any of your choices at all. Now, when you don't get this choice, you must then think, well, maybe I wasn't good enough because I didn't get 298 out of 300. I may have gotten 250, 240, maybe 200. So that then starts to impact you, the individual, and what you think you could do when you get into the secondary school system. Now, into the secondary school system, you're going to now be preparing yourself for the labor force, because not everyone is going to enter the labor force after university. Some people start work right after secondary school. Some people take a little time before they get into a university. So that means we're sending people out with a system that is, we're sending people out and they're not being fully equipped to be able to enter the labor force or even to create cutting-edge goods and services. Now, when we send you out and you're not, or the education system would not have brought out the best in you, where do you go? What happens to you? You may end up falling by the wayside, and we have particular groups in society that has a lot of people that are falling by the wayside. So it's now a problem, a national problem, but we have to think about what do we do to help the groups that are now being marginalized, the groups that are not accessing the best set of education. Because Professor Tiro, in an article in the papers, in the Express newspapers, on the 30th of October 2019, he was referring to a report written by Ramesh Deosaran saying that we have to figure out if we want to spend cost in avoidance or if we want to spend cost in creating a productive labor force. So do we want to spend money on education? Yes, we're spending money on education, but how many people is accessing the education? How many of us have access to the best education? How many of us are being empowered by that education? And what policies are we going to use to now prop the people who are not having the best access? Where are we going to find ladders to allow everyone to climb, and not just the people who would have excelled at age 12 or 13?
Thank you, Ms. Gregoire, for some interest-arousing matters related to inequality and access to education in Trinidad and Tobago. We thank you for these statistics, local statistics as well, regarding schools and so on. We now listen to our final panelist, Ms. Alana Spann, and I'll just introduce her before she begins to discuss the issue of working, poverty, and education. Alana Spann fell in love with economics as a Form 4 student of Holy Faith Convent, Couva. She saw economics as a field of study which would enable her to make a difference in the world. She pursued a Bachelor of Science degree in economics at Benedict College in South Carolina, United States of America, graduating as a top student of the economics department. She returned to Trinidad to become a secondary school economics teacher, which joined her passions for economics, teaching, and interacting with young people. She has taught at Bishop's High School and Roxborough Secondary School in Tobago, and began teaching at St. Anthony's College, Trinidad, while simultaneously pursuing her master's degree. Her current research focuses on the working poor and education. She hopes to continue on to do her PhD in the near future. Let's give her undivided attention as well as she develops the theme and area of research she's passionate about: working, poverty, and education.
Thank you. Good afternoon. All protocols observed. I have one question for you. I'm a teacher. I usually tell my students, study, get a good job, and you wouldn't be poor. How many times have you heard that? You could raise your hand if you have heard that. Okay. Do you know anyone who is working and still poor? Okay. Okay. I would put myself in that category. I can't even buy a car. Okay. Very true. Very true. Let me tell you what I have learned during my master's research on working poverty and education. Nobody wants to be poor. Okay, let's hold on for a minute, please.
Okay, we'll resume again, yeah.
Nobody wants to be poor. There are implications that are social, economic, financial, psychological. There's a man who I was speaking to yesterday who told me that the day that he doesn't have money, he will kill himself. Couldn't talk him out of it. I don't know if he was serious, if he was joking, but that's what he said. All right, so nobody wants to be poor. Working poor, I don't know if you ever heard of this term before, but it refers to people who are working and they belong to a household that is poor. There may be many people in the household. The person might have a good job, but they are still considered poor because the whole household is considered. Every child, every grandparent, everyone in the household is considered. All right? Worldwide, 1 in 5 people, or 20% of people, in the labor force are considered to be working poor. So we have 5 people up here. One of us would be considered working poor and the other 4 would not. All right, this is a worldwide statistic using 2007 data. I don't know if it will be different now, but you have at least a figure to work with. Different countries define working poverty in different ways. First of all, different countries have different poverty lines. Do you know the poverty line for Trinidad and Tobago? No? The last official one was in 2005, and in terms of US dollars, it is $4.16 per day. I'm pretty sure it would be higher now, but I was using figures from the Ministry of Social Development, right? Now, to be working poor, certain things would have to affect you. It's not just about how much money you make. Let me go into 4 main categories of what could affect you and cause you to be working poor. Number 1, your individual characteristics. First of all, your gender could affect you. A female is more likely to be working poor than a male. Your age. Make a guess. Who is more likely to be working poor, a young person or an older person? Young person. Remember, when you start off, you just graduate. You're at the bottom of the totem pole. All right? Your migration status, whether you are a citizen of a country or an immigrant, whether you are a documented immigrant or undocumented. All right? If you are undocumented, you wouldn't be able to get the best jobs. You might be a maid, a nanny, and so on. All right? Disabilities. If you have a disability, it would affect the type of job you can get and the income that you earn. Currently, in the school that I teach at, we have a boy who is visually impaired. We try the best with him, but I don't know what jobs will be available to him when he leaves school. There will be jobs, but what income level and so on. Your race. In some countries, not all, your race plays a role in the type of jobs that you get and the pay that you get. I'm not calling any countries' names, just some countries of the world, and your education level, which I will elaborate on shortly. So that was number one. Number two, household characteristics can affect working poverty. For example, the size of the household. The larger the household, the more people your income has to spread to feed and clothe and educate and so on. All right? The composition of your household. How many people in the household are children or elderly or otherwise dependent versus how many are working adults. Working intensity. How many of the adults in the household are working? All right? Your geographic location. Are you living in a rural area as opposed to an urban area? The people in the rural areas would tend to be poorer. Childcare. Have you heard about childcare in the budget, the recent budget? Access to childcare and the affordability of childcare affects how many women can enter the workforce and how many hours you could work for. All right, and all of these things could affect poverty. Number three, institutional factors. Think about where you're working. If you work in a job where there's a high trade union density, which means a lot of the workers are members of a trade union, then you could fight for your rights, such as fighting for a higher salary. I shouldn't say fight, I should say negotiate. Negotiate for a higher salary and so on, right? For example, on Tuesday, teachers were in San Fernando protesting for money. Which, some of the members of the public did not agree with. All right. Social programs by the government, food cards and other sources of redistributing money to the poor could help. And minimum wage is a tricky one. Minimum wage alone cannot make you escape working poverty. It has to be in conjunction with a lot of other things. So moving from $15 to $17.50 alone cannot just guarantee people that they will not be poor. Okay? Number four, the structure of the labor market. You have issues like whether or not you're working full-time or part-time, whether you're a seasonal worker, whether you have a permanent job or you're on a contract. And we have little issues with people being on contract in the public sector now. And when you're on contract, it could affect being able to get a loan from the bank, a mortgage, things like that. Being self-employed. Do you think self-employed people are working poor or not? Yes, according to my research, they're more likely to be working poor. They're more likely to be in a very small business, a cottage industry or something, and just surviving. If you work in a small firm, as opposed to a large firm, you might end up with a lower salary, might end up being poor. And certain industries, such as agriculture, construction, fisheries, retail, and so on, these industries have a higher concentration of working poor people than other industries. Okay, so yes, get an education, yes, get a job, but be mindful that there are so many factors that affect whether you turn out to be working poor or not. Try to find a job in a profitable, lucrative industry. Try to plan your family size and your trade union activity and all these things to guarantee that to reduce your chances of being working poor. Let me just give you figures for Trinidad and Tobago. Most of the working poor are between the ages of 30 to 39 years old. Most live in Victoria, that's in the south. Most work in the private sector, in elementary occupations such as construction. Most have one job. Most are not married. Most have a household income between $4,000 to $4,999 per month. By the time you pay $3,000 rent and you buy food with the other $2,000, that's it. Yes. Most have a small household size. Now, this one was surprising to me because I was thinking big households, lots of dependents, but most of the people, according to my study, had a small household size. There were a lot of single people in the study. They were working normal hours, up to 40 hours per week. Okay, so I looked at what education could do to reduce your chances of being working poor. And this is what I found out. I'm almost finished. The greatest chance of escaping working poverty comes from getting a university education. So everybody in this room is doing the right thing. You could applaud yourselves. So it actually decreases your chance of being working poor by 42%. This is closely followed by getting a secondary education, which will reduce your chance by 39%. A primary education and a diploma or a certificate would reduce your chances by 36%. So it's not a big difference between each level, but you want to give yourself the best chance. Okay, so university education, you're doing the right thing. I calculated the rate of return to education, and it was 11.5% for every extra year of school that you undertake. What it means is every extra year that you study, you could earn 11.5% more money than a year down. Okay, so do your bachelor's degree, go up to the master's degree, keep climbing, and you would reduce your chances of being working poor. Thank you very much.
I want to thank the last two panelists again who touched on mainly education, and Ms. Gregoire speaking about inequality and access to education, and she gave us some statistics regarding the local statistics from our Ministry of Education. Ms. Spann mentioned the issue of the working poor and education, a link therein. The next part, well, before I go on to the next part, let's thank all the panelists again with a hearty round of applause, please. We had 40 minutes of rich, diverse content that was hinged in facts. We noticed that each panelist had quoted their sources and so on. This part, for the next 5 to 10 minutes, I'm going to engage each of the panelists, pose a question to them based on what they asked. I would be more rigorous with our last two presenters because they have graduate education in economics. And the undergraduate students, I would pose a question at the appropriate level. So I would engage them at this point right now. And then subsequently, I would open up the floor to you members of the audience. And we hope that you will freely participate in our cozy setting here this afternoon. So the question I'd like to pose to Ms. Gregoire and Ms. Spann, it's the same question. I want to ask you what strategies you would employ to address the issues that you raised here today. Probably if you can give 2 to 3 strategies to address your specific, the issues that you raised. You all raised a range of issues, so if you can state some of them that are glaringly or stand out based on what work you have done, and then what you do specifically. Feel free to go in the realm of a utopian world, because the 2030 agenda may be utopian, but we can't bridge a gap unless we identify what is the solution. So as a former boss of mine would tell me, Jason, you just told me the problem. I now need the solution. So if you could identify for us the key problems you see with what the research you have undertaken, and then what solutions you would offer. And I don't know who would like to go first. Ms. Gregoire, all right. And while Ms. Gregoire and Ms. Spann respond to my question, I'll then decide what question I'm going to ask the two undergraduate students. Okay, so I'll start with Ms. Gregoire. So that again, my question to the both of them would be, what strategies would they employ to address the issues that they raised for us here today? Okay? Ms. Gregoire first.
So I would start by reiterating what I think is the problem or the issue. The issue is inequality in the access to education, because not everybody has the same opportunity when we compete for resources. So we have to see who is by the wayside, who is falling by the wayside. And when we get into the data sets, we're going to realize that you can pull out different things that would make people fall to the wayside. Now, the academic performance index would have noticed there's a limitation to it, because there are other things, socioeconomic factors, and other things that would, absenteeism, that would prevent the individual from achieving at their best when they take the national test. So if you don't achieve your best at the national test, we need to widen the areas of education and see where else we can give you a ladder to climb. If you miss the first step at age 12 or 13, you shouldn't have a heart attack and then realize, well, I didn't get to go to Fatima, I didn't get to go to QRC. That should be okay. You should enter the education system still, and then we should be able to find you other areas where you would be able to climb and to go to the point that you want to. So if you went to a school way down in the carcass, you went to a junior secondary or government secondary school, a school that's now under academic watch, we should be able to allow you to still have the opportunity to be here and to have a university education. Now, when you look at who's not having access and where the silent groups are, the concept of ethnicity then starts to get into your equation. So when you look at the data set, you're going to be able to pull out which group in society isn't able to climb the ladder and isn't climbing as fast. So we need to have policies from the government, at least first a discussion where these people are, who they are, what ethnicity are they, and then we have to do focus groups with that set of people to allow them to realize that they have a problem. Because up to now, that particular group is silent on the problem that exists. So they're taking the problem, thinking it's something personal, and not realizing it's that the education system and sometimes the historical and the socioeconomic background that is holding you back. So figure out what the problem is within your area, meaning let us talk about the elephant in the room, that ethnicity is a problem, and get into the discussion, how can we help these people who are being held back?
Okay, for working poverty, I focus mainly on what individuals can do, not so much what government could do, right? So the individual, I was thinking that at the secondary school level, at the university level, you could be given classes, workshops that help you to plan certain aspects of your life properly, all right? So, for example, at the secondary school level, I know there are classes teaching students how to write resumes and do job interviews, but how about going deeper and giving them full career guidance, giving them guidance on how to plan your household size, how to plan the industry that you should work in. Just based on the 4 factors that I said that affect working poverty, just doing workshops that help you to properly plan out your life. Just being real. Okay, sometimes we move based on what we feel and what friends are doing and what our parents say we should do, and we don't properly plan. So, for example, I didn't go straight from secondary school to university. There was a 2-year break. All right? Some people would go straight because they have the financial means or their parents push them. Some don't. I taught a student who, as soon as she graduated, she was pregnant from KEEP. I'm not saying that anything is wrong with that, but it would slow down her progress towards getting university education and so on. All right, so properly plan, and the adults need to sit and speak to youths about these things. The government could engage in education, just general education, like, for example, where I calculated the rate of return on education. The government could make these things into advertisements on TV. If you get a university education, you would have a 42% lower chance of being working poor. Put the information out there so that people could see it, all right? And they could understand that life is not a joke. I think I'm speaking in my teacher's hat here, all right? Life is not a joke. You go to school, you go as far as you can, as early as you can, and it will set you up for a good future. So my solutions, just educating people in general. Do it through media, do it through workshops, help young people to think carefully about their futures.
Okay, so we got some strategies from the two graduate students. The question I'd probably pose to Ms. Sukdeo and Ms. Nanku would be, if you, I'm thinking here still, Ms. Sukdeo, you were dealing with climate action. So imagine you were the Minister of Environment. What do you think is the leading issue regarding climate change in Trinidad and Tobago? You mentioned a few: plastics, disasters, etc. What do you think is the major issue regarding climate change, climate action locally, and how would you address that issue? And relatedly, Ms. Nanku, I'd like to ask you, imagine you're the Minister of Health. What do you think is the major health issue facing Trinidad and Tobago? I know you mentioned non-communicable diseases or lifestyles affecting individual. What do you think is the leading issue or challenge? Is it HIV/AIDS? And after identifying an issue, tell me what you would do as the Minister of Health. So I'm putting you all in government as honorable ministers and as change agents. What is the first issue, or the major issue, not first, the major issue you think affecting our country, and how would you deal with that issue relating the topic that you had mentioned? And I'll allow you all to volunteer for who's going first. Okay.
So I mentioned when I first started speaking that, we were named the top polluter in the entire world. So I think that is our pressing problem here. I think that another problem that we have is our infrastructure, our geography, but our geography is something we can't really control. But with regards to our infrastructure, that could help our geography. So you would see in Port of Spain, when rainfall for 2 minutes is chaos. So I think investing in infrastructure in those areas to sort of alleviate those kind of problems will help in mitigating some of the problems that we have with respect to climate change. With respect to our pollution habits, I think that the answer is education. It's making your public aware, whether it's informal, formally, it's embedding it in your way of thinking. I think we need to create this sort of shift in our institutional framework, in our way of thinking, in our way of life. And as I mentioned in my opening remarks as well, I think the way to do this is by your early childhood education. So those are just one or two of the things I would address first to start with.
Okay, as I mentioned before, heart disease is the leading cause of death within the region, throughout the region, and it's actually one of the non-communicable diseases that accounts for over 60% of deaths right here in Trinidad and Tobago. So I think now we are beginning to see that at earlier stages of life, individuals are beginning to develop these diseases. the earlier we are. We are looking at our grandparents. They are from a different generation. They would develop such diseases at a later time in their life, whereas we're seeing now that adolescents are beginning to develop these diseases in their 20s, in their early 30s. And I think it's all a matter of lifestyle choices and the way that our consciousness to what we are intaking. Say that we are living off of, I think now we are living off of highly processed foods. We are living highly off of high sugar and high fat calorie intakes. We are living off of, we are less likely to live off of fresh fruits, say fresh fruits and vegetables and things like that. We are actually, the easiest thing is to go and purchase something, and that's what we are consuming on a daily basis. And little by little, these things are adding up, these factors are adding up, and we are engaging less and less in physical activity, and we are seeing that through the addition of all these factors, our likelihood of developing one of these diseases are becoming very, very high. And I think a lifestyle change is much required in order to combat these issues, say, throughout the region. I think people, adolescents especially, need to be a little more health conscious, a little more conscious about what we are intaking, what we are putting into our bodies, a little more conscious about our levels of physical activity. And I think at that rate, we can combat non-communicable diseases within the region. In terms of, I know you were asking me about sexually transmitted diseases. I think it's all a matter of awareness, because at the end of the day, we might think that it's so far-fetched for us to acquire one of these diseases or develop one of these diseases, but I think the main fact, it all boils down to the fact that if we are engaging in risky sexual behavior, the chances of us developing AIDS or HIV becomes very, very slim. And I think at the end of the day, it's all about protecting ourselves, and it's all about being aware of what activities we engage in, and being aware of the options out there to get tested, the options out there to seek treatment, and the fact that it is not something that you should be ashamed of. I think awareness is very important in this aspect, and it would greatly assist in combating these diseases throughout the region. Thank you.
So I want to thank the panelists for responding. We now open up the floor to questions from you, members of the audience. So we would take 3 questions. I'll just review what were their themes again. As I call your name, if you could just raise your hand again so they'll recall. So Ms. Dana Sukdeo was handling, if you could raise your hand for everybody to remember, climate action. Ms. Nanku, health and well-being. Ms. Gregoire, inequality and access to education. And Ms. Spann, working, poverty and education. So you can remember the specific streams that they took if you want to direct a question to them individually. And then probably we might get into we'll start micro and then get into a macro if you want to pose a general to all. So we have 1 question so far. Do we have a second person lined up? So that's 1, 2. Let me take 1 from each section. So 1 from the section, 2, span the audience. And 3rd, your hand was up. I kind of saw her hand before, but I'll come back to you, right? Your hand was up with the, right. So 1, where's number 2? Right, I got her. Number 2 and then number 3. So we listen to the question first. Can I encourage your question to be very specific and focused? Not double-barreled questions. It will be a little easier for the panelists to respond, as well as us for the audience to follow what you are asking. So, and also when you are given the mic, if you could just state your name, please, and your affiliation. We'll appreciate that for future. Yeah, your name, affiliation, and what the question is. So we'd listen. Yeah.
I don't think I need a mic because I can speak quite loudly.
No problem. And you are?
Yeah. My name is Dr. Johnson. I am the Director of Social Investigations Division with the Ministry of Social Development and Family Services. I'm also an assistant professor of the City University of New York. I'm on sabbatical now, so I'm just here picking up Trinidad and
Just to clarify, your question was to her, where did she get the... Okay, so we'll allow her to respond after. Okay, no problem. Before you go on, panelists, please note the question you asked, all right? Okay, go ahead. Okay, thanks to the 3 questions. Panelists, you all got those? Great. I go to the second member of the audience. Please identify yourself, your affiliation, and... Yeah.
Okay, good day everyone, and I'm a final year student of the Faculty of Science and Technology.
Good.
My major is environmental science.
Very good.
I was invited by Mrs. Halima today.
Yes.
So I thank her for inviting me.
And we're glad to have you here.
Okay, first of all, I thoroughly enjoyed all 4 speeches from the panelists. I actually have 2 questions, but since I'm allowed one, I'll ask one.
You can ask your 2 questions.
Okay, so my first question is Ms. Dana Sukde, right? Mm-hmm. So her speech was on climate change. She raised a number of excellent points, right? She mentioned the rebound effect. She linked education system and promoting sustainability. My question is, what initiative have you done, or are you planning to do to help reduce the drastic effects of climate change? And the second question I have to Mrs. Gregoire, she mentioned inequality in society concerning income and economical aspect, right? She examined various districts in Trinidad and the level of excellence. I want to ask you, the statistics that you provided in analyzing certain primary schools that are under academic watch, would you say that these schools that were under academic watch, have you seen an improvement in students' academic performance? And that's my question. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. So we have 5 questions so far. And our third member of the audience, please indicate your name and your affiliation.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Renee Jackson, and I'm an econ major, so all protocols observed. My question is to Ms. Dana Sukdeo. So essentially, the world is going into a direction as we are reducing our we're trying to reduce our dependence on fossil fuels and moving to a more renewable type of environment where we're using solar, we're using wind, and our society is heavily dependent on fossil fuels for our economy. So what would that mean to us, and how should our students be educated to deal with the effects of this change globally? Thank you.
Thanks a lot. So we got 6 questions there. So we will deal with the first question. You ready for that one? All right. Okay. So you want to respond?
First question was, okay. Oh, is it? Oh, no. I would firstly like to apologize for the miscommunication of data. I got my statistics from the World Bank within the time span of doing this research, but I think I may have missed the update on it somehow, somewhere, so I do apologize for that. Can I answer the second and third question? Okay.
Yeah. We would like to thank, could you remind me of the name again? Dr. Johnson. We would like to thank you for your observation. I saw the article in the newspaper myself, but even though we have dropped and the statistic was refined, the issue is still an issue at large, locally, regarding plastics that needs to be addressed. When we go to our local rivers, when we move about in our community and on the beaches, there's a lot of plastic that plagues everywhere. So even though we are not number one, it's still a major issue affecting. Yeah, we're number 50, but it's still an issue, and the theme of our session was bridging that gap. It still needs to be addressed. I remember a study by a former professor of mine, Professor Pantin, 20 years ago, calling for that legislation with work. We're not number one, but it's still an issue. You see it every day glaringly when we go to our beaches, our rivers, and so on. But, and the lesson for our panelists, who's an undergraduate student, would be, as she willingly accepted the current research, we always try to get current feedback. All right, we now go to the second question. That would be, was posed to Ms. Gregoire, was that? Yeah, I believe you were number 2, yeah. Yes, you went to first.
I almost forgot that the second question was to me. All right. So I got the question was, what was the role of parents in education? Now, parents do take a significant role because they are there to choose the schools, they are there to push their children, they are spending extra funding for lessons. The problem here is not only about what the individual can do to push the students, because when you have the dynamics of a plural society and a developing economy, you can only do so much because the structures exist outside of you. And then based on the amount of income you have to push your child, your circumstances then become constrained and limited by the amount of push you can do based on that income level. So yes, the parents are there. Yes, they push their children through. Yes, they spend for additional funding on lessons and books and everything like that. But granted that is the case, the issue here is that the schools that are under academic watch are in particular places, and different groups of people are being marginalized because they don't have the income to go forward. They don't have what it takes, because we're not all competing at the same playing field. We're on the same playing field, but each of us have different strengths on the playing field. The second question I think I got from on this side, inequality, and have I seen an improvement in the academic performance based on the Academic Performance Index. The report was from 2011 to 2016, and I'm using 2016 figures, but it is consistent that the schools that are under academic watch, they are there for a while. So it's not that they are, yes, we are trying to make changes and trying to push and to see where we're at, but it's a particular group of people that are being affected. That's why I asked for the concept of ethnicity to be introduced, because we have to see not just the inequalities that exist or schools that are performing poorly. We have to ask ourselves, who's in the school that is performing poorly and why are they there? Because it's not going to change over a 1-year period or a 2-year period. The students are there, they may pass through, but a different group of people will come in, or a different group of students will come in, and then the problem still remains. So it's who is there, how are they being affected, and what can we do? Because if you're affected in that area, we need to make sure that you're not going to be continuously affected or that you fall short because you'd have been affected at one point.
Okay, Dr. Johnson, thank you for your question and comment. I would say we are not doing enough in all the areas that you mentioned. For example, making known to people what is the opportunity cost of having children outside of wedlock. I love children. I always wanted 10 children. But there's an opportunity cost to having children before you finish the highest level of education you want to reach and so on, right? In terms of years of earnings that you would have to give up to take the child from baby stage to probably toddler stage. All right, and we just need to make that opportunity cost more widely known so that people could make better choices. I don't want to say better. People could make the choices that they want to get the outcome that they want in their lives. In terms of education beyond secondary school and not relating to university, I think that we have been trying, the government has been trying to focus on technical vocational education. We have MIC program, YTEP, and so on. But what I noticed is that it's not being utilized as much as it could be. There are a lot of people who are idle at home who could go to these programs and get a stipend for going to the program. So we're not educating them properly in the benefits of going to these programs and learning something hands-on. All right, so we need to do better there. And I think there's a stigma as well to say I'm going to school to learn plumbing or welding. There's a stigma, even though these people could make crazy money. All right, so we need to get rid of the stigma surrounding that. And in terms of the working poor having to work more hours or needing 2 jobs, I think our Caribbean culture is very laid back, and people would not like to work 2 jobs if they could work one and go home and relax with the family and just survive. All right, it's the culture. So that one would require a bit more work in trying to change the mindsets of people to work more. Okay.
To the gentleman who asked me about the climate change question, you asked what have I done to contribute to the mitigation of climate change. Now, you know, you always see like these great young engineers making these devices in the ocean that picks up plastic. I can't do that. I'm not an engineer. But what I can do is be environmentally conscious of my actions. What I can do is talk to my peers about climate change. Anytime I learn something new, a new way to conserve or do something, I talk to them about it. It's spreading awareness. Whenever I go to, I mentioned in my biography that I do work with orphanages whenever I go. It's spreading knowledge and spreading education in that way for me. It's also, as I said, your lifestyle choices. It's going to beach cleanups. It's when you see a person polluting and you tell them about it and they watch you on your stoops. You don't do anything. You just pick it up and you throw it in the bin yourself. It's the little actions that add up at the end of the day for me. To Ms. Renee Jackson, I particularly liked your question because I really feel passionate about that area. So you asked me what were the implications of us being an energy-based economy. And obviously that is going to create the dependence, pulling the dependence away from energy is going to create a large drop in our energy sector. What I would recommend for us to do is to push our education system into our sectors that are non-booming tradable. So that's your manufacturing, your agriculture. So for example, the manufacturing sector has a 32 excess capacity. Well, not 32% exact, but it's around that figure somewhere. So if we push and utilize these sectors, we can somehow create a dependence away from the energy sector. And I know Ms. Spann mentioned when she was talking about the working poor, to get a job and to go into the profitable sector, which for us is energy, right? But if you really look at it in the long term, personally, I think, she's not wrong, but I think that we need to push our education system to make more innovative thinkers, to make more thinkers to go into entrepreneurial activities, to stimulate this diversification away from the energy sector. And I think that's what we can do.
Thank you. We now take another round of questions. So we would start with Miss Halima. Go ahead, okay. All right, okay. So I'll start with this individual, then I'd go, we'll take Halima, Dr. Lafoucade, and finally Dr. Conrad. So we're going in that rounds. Panelists, get your pencils out, note your question so you could respond appropriately. Okay, so you can let us hear your question.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody.
Good afternoon, and state your name again and affiliation.
My name is Trina Palacio. I'm a Venetian student, hopefully final year.
Great. We wish you all the best with that.
So I have several questions, but two most pressing ones that I would like to ask.
Great.
For speaker number 2.
Yes, that would be Miss Nanku. Yeah, she was dealing with health and well-being.
And then my second question would be for Ms. Yeah?
Right.
Okay, so one of the things that I noticed that we were talking about, I'm very much into health, like very, very much into health. But one of the things you were talking about would be expanding the way how we think. So, thank you.
So expanding the way how we think about food, how we take care of our bodies and things like that. But I think that, what I wanted to ask you is, do you look at the price of food and the type of food that is offered in Trinidad as an underlying factor of health for some of these same non-communicable diseases? Because coming from a country where food is cheap, like extremely dirt cheap, and the food is natural, like non-GMO, fully farm-raised kind of things and whatever, chicken that is not, doesn't have in, the antibiotics. So that is something that has been very important to me as well, because when we're even looking at things like chickens that are fed with corn and GMO products and blah, 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 and antibiotics and stuff like that, that affects our health. So even me as an individual who might be looking at, okay, I want to live a healthy life in Trinidad, which is the same lifestyle that I would have been living in Belize, I eat the chicken. What is in the chicken that I'm eating, you know? And what is in the food that I'm consuming? And for a person who loves to cook, that is very alarming for me. So is that something you take into consideration when you think about raising consciousness, not just the consciousness of the actual public, but how about the consciousness, or how do we force governments? How do we speak to these different people who are in power, who bring in things into the country, because Trinidad does not grow a lot of its food, right? So who is in charge of that consciousness? Is it just the public, or is it more, is it deeper than that? My second question, which is to Ms. Spann, it's a little bit more complex. I would want you guys to have a conversation because I think your research is so important. But what bothered me about the working poverty, because I come from a lot of working poverty, right? So for me, what bothered me is that I was wondering if you thought about it being problematic as well in the sense of planning. So you spoke about planning, which I think is very important. Coming from Afro-Indigenous background, so I come from, and that's why I wanted to bring in what you were talking about. So you spoke a lot about diversity. You talked about plural societies. You talked about that. This is obviously to Ms. Gregoire. Yeah. So you talked about plural societies, and you talked about how these different things just affect how we move up in the educational sector, but also how we look at it when it comes to working poor. I thought that is very important because a lot of the things that weren't noted, I think, from that side is we looked at where you are, so urbanization, we talked about different schools, blah, 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 but the ethnicity is very important. Culture, plural societies, because for me, coming from an Afro-Indigenous background, we grow up in that, and that's a part of what's important to us.
And when you're looking at planning and you're talking about the types of industries that you would be going into and like diversification and these things, did you think about how the industries that you mentioned, particularly agriculture and fisheries, which is very important again to me, if we look at how we plan, would that not put some of those industries in jeopardy? Should we sacrifice those industries for our countries? Yeah.
Could you repeat that last question first?
Like, should we sacrifice some of these industries when we plan or when we teach people how to plan? Because if I'm telling you, go more towards like petroleum or medicine, whatever industry everybody is supporting at that point, or which is making more money, which might put you in a position to avoid being in the working poor classification, the bracket, would you be sacrificing some of these very key and important industries that societies that we have?
Good. Thanks a lot. Halima, you'd be the second question.
Okay, so thank
Halima,
you. And I think our
Halima,
last...
for those who don't know, you want to say your name and...
Halima Ali Sisbain, HEU Center for Health Economics. Before I comment, I want to congratulate members of the panel. You have done an awesome job and definitely enlightened members of the audience. And I know a lot went into preparing for your presence on the forum, and I want to wish you all the best in your future endeavors. And linked to the comment that was made earlier, when we talk about, well, I have a few, I'll be brief, I promise. Working poor. There are two words there, working poor. If we're having issues with working, yes, we're working, we have money, but our money is not enough. Perhaps we need to look at why we're poor. The cost of living is too high. So long ago, you would work for $4,000, nominal terms, but it would be enough. So the cost of living has been changing, and a significant portion of that is the cost of food, linked to our previous speaker. So perhaps we need to go in a roundabout way and deal with that working poor issue. In terms of the comment on the inequality and that whole dilemma, that is no surprise then for why parents are rushing to send their children to particular schools. And I'm very proud to say I went to a junior secondary. How many of you know what is a junior secondary school? Okay, and I have attended a junior secondary school. And yes, there's a lot of branding and stigma associated with attending junior secondary schools. And the Ministry of Education, I know, has moved towards trying to neutralize that stigma by introducing secondary schools. Am I correct? In terms of 5-year and not the 3-year that we would have attended. But there is still that stigma. You're attending, what was a junior secondary? Perhaps then what the policymakers need to do is to look into why those schools are performing better. And I can tell you, because I am a proud junior secondary student, it has to do a lot with attitude. The attitude, if you change the attitudes of those attending the school, well, that is one factor, and it's very significant. You can see positive outcomes. Something else I was going to ask Dana, but I think Dana had a lot of questions, so I'll just leave my 2 comments there. Thanks.
Okay. Yeah.
Good afternoon and congratulations to our panelists. Well done. I really enjoyed the various contributions. I would be begging the facilitator to bear with me. I have some comments that may not really lead to questions, but, just to point out a few things. And Halima, coming right after you, I want to say we are sisters in crime. I am a proud attendee of a junior secondary school also. So, with that said, I am Althea Lafoucard. I'm affiliated to the Department of Economics and the HU Center for Health Economics. I was also, as being a junior sec person, the first PhD graduate of economics on this campus. Some observations. In terms of inequality to access to education in Trinidad and Tobago, I noted the statement that not everybody has the same opportunity with respect to education, access to education. And I understand the context in which that was said. I also listened to the statements pertaining to the different schools on Academic Watch or so. I read it in the newspaper, the different commentaries and analysis pertaining to that. I am in agreement with the sentiments expressed by the panelists. What I would say is that from observation, even as a contributor, having children in the public schools at the primary school level to do SEA and in private schools, what I think my own observation suggests to me is that it's not always so much the school, although the school environment could push in a certain direction and pull, but the role of the parents. In that, I suspect if we have parents sending, and we do have those negative outcomes, where we have busy parents opting to have children go to private schools that are supposed to be good schools, and having negative outcomes, struggling then to try to get the children on a 20% list and doing different kinds of things because maybe they did not have the time to dedicate to sit with the little ones, recognizing that they are little ones, babies, they are 10, 11, 12, to sit with them and to guide them. And the engagement with the school and the teacher. I think when you have that support system in place, the outcomes may tend to be better. In terms of the working poor, I observed and I noticed that we have somebody, a woman of my own heart, 10 children she wanted. I don't know what the thinking is pertaining to that. I got one. In terms of the family size, I noted that you were observing that while the literature will indicate that the larger the family size, the more likely the members of the household may be to fall into that categorization of working poor, your research suggested that in the case of Trinidad and Tobago and some of the things you saw, that the households, they had small sizes. I also noted that you mentioned women being more likely to be among the working poor. And you noted that if individuals had 1+ jobs, they might be less likely to become working poor. That then, when I take that, so you need to work more hours, have more jobs, in order to reduce the probability of falling into that category. When I think in terms of some of the things that may place the little children coming up on the side of not coming into the working poor, because we also observe that education, the educational levels and opportunities and so on may cause you not to become working poor. But if the children, if the parents are working more hours and they cannot sit with the one-on-one, with the students at that young age, then it may be that the fruit will fall far from the tree, in that the parents may go and they continue their education, which we are seeing happening now. So older ones and so on pursuing university education, and the children may not then have the benefit of the parent guiding them to ensure that their generation has a good outcome in the working poor. In terms of one other observation I had was in relation to the non-communicable diseases and so on. And there we were saying that we observed heart diseases and so on being the leading causes of death, morbidity, mortality in the region. And somewhere along there, we noted that consumption patterns could be contributing to this. We have no dispute about that. We also observed that perhaps if we were grabbing onto the easy to get at foods and so, this could put us on the negative side of having good outcomes with not getting the non-communicable diseases. However, what we are seeing is that if we are not to be among the working poor, then we have to work more hours. We have to have more jobs, not just one. We even say it might be a cultural thing, and perhaps we might even think that that cultural thing is a negative kind of cultural thing for us to want to work less hours, work one job, and go home with the family. Again, we saw that in terms of going home, spending time with the family, with the children, that could put the future generations in a better place. So, as I said, my thing was not really necessarily questions, but just comments. I thought it was some interesting things that came out here, where we had some entanglement there in terms of the social fabric, the culture, the things that could give us good well-being, health and well-being. And that sometimes, yes, we don't want to be poor, but sometimes we'll have to look at what are the softer sides, where it's not necessarily just about the income, but the well-being. And the well-being of the family may sometimes mean that we need to give up some things on the income side in order to get at that well-being and the quality life. Okay. Thank you.
Dr. Lafikad. Dr. Conrad? Oh, okay.
Heightened awareness where the climate is concerned. But I'm not hearing as part of the dialogue the sustainable education or education for sustainable development. I'm not hearing that in the discussion, in the discourse. So maybe that's something that should be considered for inclusion in this regard. The other one I'm hearing about, I listened to the inequality and I listened to the issue of the working poor. And I'm wondering, to what extent is this a legacy of slavery and a byproduct of capitalism? So I'm wondering if we should include those elements, a historical context, so that we can understand that it's not something that is going to be easily addressed, one being a legacy and the other being a byproduct. And thirdly, to the issue of environmental awareness. If we think to the environmental Kuznets curve, we see that the economic growth and development comes at a cost of environmental degradation and extensive use of energy. And a number of the countries that have been taking the lead on reducing their carbon footprint and being more being more aware of what is happening in terms of the environmental degradation are those countries that are a little bit more developed and advanced, and that, according to the environmental Kuznets curve, at some point you will be able to address the issue of environment in the realm of economic growth and development. So I'm wondering if it is that we may be prematurely reducing our ability to grow beyond where we can grow if we begin immediately and swiftly to address the issue of environmental degradation and the likes. Not saying that it is not important, but we have to think about whether or not we are going to foster this sort of thinking at the expense of further growth and development. As studies have shown that when you begin to reduce your carbon footprint and some of these more environmentally friendly policies, that you do reduce your level of growth to some extent. So those are just some things for consideration. Thank you.
Thanks. In the interest of time, Mr. McLean, do forgive me. We just want to let the panelists respond, and we have to close out. No, we'll have just a brief comments, okay? All right.
Okay, so I know that you asked me about non-communicable diseases, and if the solution goes deeper than just an expansion in thinking, if it goes to the price of food and whatnot? And my answer is yes. It actually goes deeper than that because let's be real. When we're speaking about freshly grown and hand-picked foods, the price tends to be significantly higher than, let's say, we go out there and we just purchase something to eat. The prices tend to be significantly higher, especially, we could see this on the shelves of all our groceries, actually, when we're looking for organic items. They tend to be significantly higher than, say, fast food options. So, at the end of the day, in looking at the bigger picture, I think, well, I'm not a chef, but preparing a meal at home, I think, also tends to be significantly higher than just buying something to eat, purchasing something out there. And I think that you also asked me if it goes deeper in terms of just the general public, or does it have to do with policymakers as well? And I believe policymakers do play a significant role in the phenomenon of non-communicable diseases because they have the power to alter conditions to affect costs related to healthier lifestyles throughout the region. For example, maybe they could remove import duties on organic food items, or maybe they could impose import quotas, etc., on processed foods, foods high of fat, foods high of sugar. So I think in doing so, we could combat the phenomenon of non-communicable diseases and its prevalence within our region if we just reform our policies, reform tax policies on our food, etc. And I think that would combat the issue of non-communicable diseases, heart disease, cancer, obesity, stuff like that. Thank you.
I'm going to try to be brief. I got warned. Brief. Okay, so first thing I want to do is to shout out to the people of Belize. The Statistical Institute of Belize responds to everything and shares their data willingly. And bearing in mind that I'm looking at the evolution of poverty and inequality within plural societies, Belize is on my list of countries to look at. And yes, ethnicity does play a significant role because when you're looking at the evolution of poverty and inequality, education is going to be a variable within the analysis, and as well as ethnicity is going to be a variable within the analysis. Now, if I could piggyback on some of Alana's work talking about working poor, when you start to take apart the economy, you're going to see, when you break it down by sector, by ethnicity, by education, you're going to be able to pull out or at least create synonyms for different areas within the economy. So for instance, in Trinidad, if I say public sector, that's normally African. If I say agriculture, that might mean Indian. If I say education, that might mean a different group. If I say retail and wholesale, I'm talking about Syrian and Chinese. So it's going to be when we look at the working poor, we have to figure out who is in there, and we have to get into the indicator and disaggregate it, because when you look at an indicator, it's normally just one that's going to be anonymous. But to figure out who the working poor are, we have to disaggregate it and see which group is being affected. And so far into the analysis, the groups that are being affected aren't really saying anything. They're kind of silent on the analysis. Now, to Dr. Conrad's question, with the historical context and colonialism and slavery, yes, it is a legacy that would have been inherited, and it's going to take some time to change that. But the point of noting there is that with sustainable development, if we don't make policy and correct the inequalities, we are going to leave a portion of the population marginalized and behind. So towards using your education to achieve sustainable development, if a portion of your population, 1/3 of your population or half of your population isn't getting the access and isn't being engaged, then sustainable development will never be achieved. I feel being brief, I will pass it over.
Okay, very quickly, to the student from Belize. We certainly don't want agriculture, fisheries, construction, and so on to die out as industries. What I would recommend is that people get a degree in agribusiness and then go into the agriculture industry. Get a degree in project management and then go into construction and so on. So when you enter these industries, you could actually boost them and, employ other people and help to bring them out of working poverty as well. Boost these sectors instead of letting them die. To Ms. Alice Spann, yes, I agree with you. High cost of living could affect working poverty. To Dr. Lafourcade, I agree with you that there's a trade-off between income and staying at home with your children to lift the next generation. Is a good point. And yes, Dr. Conrad, I agree that slavery and capitalism play a role in working poverty. Thank you.
And one last point, if I could stick in here, just to shout out to the Junior Sec Posse. I am one too.
So I want to thank these 4 Wonder Women in front of us who did excellent presentations. We want to give them a round of applause again. We now hand over to the chair. Before I do so, I would like to use my facilitator position, Dr. Lafourcade. We may need a more balanced gender equity next year. I'm seeing strong young men in the audience, so I look forward to seeing them next year. So we have 50% equity, men and women. I now hand over to the chair, Ms. Roxanne Brizan.
Thank you, Jason, and thank you all the panelists. At this point, I'd like to call Mr. Joel Jordan, who would deliver the vote of thanks on behalf of the Planning Committee.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I know we just said that we're going to do the vote of thanks. However, I want to show appreciation for our panel today by giving some tokens of appreciation to our panel, and I'm going to call our sponsor representative from Sagicor. We do appreciate the sponsorship from Sagicor because it allows us to do these types of forums. And Mr. Jivet Brown. All right. So first of all, we'll start with the chair of this evening's proceedings, Mr. Jason Alexander. All right. So you'll have to look over in that direction. All right. Then we move forward to Dana Sukdio. Then we will move on to Ms. Alicia Nanku. And to Ms. Corinne Gregoire. And finally, to Ms. Alana Spann. Thank you guys so very much. And I would move over to the vote of thanks. If I miss out anybody, I don't mean to miss you guys out. And I hope that this 3-page vote of thanks, just kidding, it was 1 page. Would kind of cover it. All protocols observed. I deem it a great honor to have been asked to propose this vote of thanks for the 2nd Youth Economic Forum. And I'd like to extend a very hearty vote of thanks to all who have attended this event and contributed to this evening's proceedings. We would like to especially thank our sponsor, Sagicor, our current and past students who make up this panel, that is Mr. Jason Alexander, Ms. Dana Sukdio, Ms. Alicia Nanku, Ms. Corinne Gregoire, and Ms. Alana Spann. Representatives from our collaborators and also members of the Planning Committee, Ms. Roxanne Brizan, Ms. Halima Ali Sisbin from the HEU, well, Roxanne is from the Department of Economics, Mr. Kieran Rubin from the Economics Students of Society of the UWI.
And Mr. Joel Jordan.
Right. It is with a deep sense of appreciation that I acknowledge the contributions of Ms. Wendy Maynard from the Office of Marketing and Communications, Dr. Altia Lafourcade, who's the head of the Department of Economics and affiliated HEU, all our service providers, caterers, audio technicians, photographers, the staff at the HEU, Center for Health Economics, the ESU and the executive and its members, the Secretariat of the Department of Economics, all right? And I want to state that we are most grateful to you, our audience, and we would like to thank you guys for being with us this afternoon. Thanks. So at the end of it, we want to just provide a little bit of refreshment and to kind of continue the discussion until 4 o'clock. So if you guys have any questions that you need to ask the panelists, we want to encourage you guys to mingle, to mix a little bit, and to just stay with us for a while again. Thanks.